Dude, so like, later in this video, I want to talk about comments, but have you ever really spent a lot of time looking at the comments on our YouTube videos? Because I look at them once or twice a day, because we know we do videos and blogs and stuff like that. I know you guys at home, I'm probably going to include this in the video, but we try to touch the comments as much as we can, but we've got the free advice section, and we kind of urge people to use that, because it's easier to talk to people there. But the comments, we do look at them, I respond to them as much as I can. But sometimes, I'll be straight with you, mate, some of those comments, they get a bit left field, and I'll be honest, this is a public platform. It's the internet. Some of the comments like, I don't like your face, teeth, shirt, anything. British accent, you pronounce Utah wrong. You name it, it's there, buddy. Water off a duck's back. Couldn't care less. But then you get comments like this. I'm going to read it here, and I'm hopefully going to put it on screen if this makes it to the video. And it is, do you shave your chest, or is it naturally smooth? And I didn't know how to, like, what is that, mate? What world are we living in? But then I dug a little deeper. And that's not the only time I've been asked that. Different people have asked me, such as this one, you have absolutely no hair on your chest, ? I think it's the question mark that bugs me the most. And one of them, someone with a username God, just commented, lol. And frankly, I think he's got more on his plate right now. It's really odd. After this, I'll send you the screenshot. But it's a weirdly recurrent question.
So what do you prefer?
What? What do you mean?
Shaved or waxed? Or
I don't do anything. Don't be one of them, man. Don't be one of them. Hello and welcome back. And that is right. We got to talk about Synology, and we've got to talk about some of the new information that has come up on the radar in the last week or so. We've done a few videos and a few articles about it, and I'll be honest with you, the comments section has been a little too hot to handle. A lot of the time when we do talk about new releases, let's be realistic, let's lay our cards on the table. This is not a hot, sexy, incredible subject. We are still talking about servers, and much like any of you that buy a new TV, a new home device, a new cooker, a microwave, there's this preset period where you hit the books like Buffett. You just continuously read up and research and follow channels until eventually you pull the trigger and buy the thing you want to buy. And then you never go to those sites for another 2 to 3 years until you're ready to upgrade again. As I'm saying, this is not a hot subject, but still nonetheless, when we started talking about the new DS1522 and the RS422 Plus, it has to be said that a number of you did not take kindly to some of the specifications that we talked about there. These do seemingly, as legitimate and as authorized as these are from the sources that we've got them. None of this comes from official Synology sources, but it does come from leaks and information that in the past has been largely proven to be true almost all the time. So this is pretty much the way these devices are going to be. And let's face it, there is one persistent topic about these devices, one particular component that you guys are not chuffed about. It's me, Eddie the Web Guy. I've been talking for ages. I think it's his turn. As always, Eddie, tell me right now, what are your thoughts on these new releases?
New releases, really, really disappointed. Lately, I've been disappointed for too often. And this time, I'm especially disappointed because of the fiber being removed from the multimedia sort of range. Because before they used to have Celerons, and now they seem to be moving towards AMD CPUs, which means there's no graphics chip built in. There are few generations of the AMD that have actually graphics chip built in, but they chose not to have it. That must be a reason to cut down the costs, probably to increase the profits or something. But people are not happy, and that includes me. And also, not having this 2.5 gig LAN port on the back of the NAS also is very disappointing. But adding 10 gigabit option, that actually is surprising me, because they have innovated quite massively. Nobody else in the market has something like this, so you'll be able to just slot in. I think it's going to be M2 slot they're going to be using there to connect to this M2 10 gigabit adapter. But I hope this is going to be across it's going to be spread across the other range as well, like 4 bays and maybe even 2 bays. If it's like quad core Celeron, I would hope that happens. But overall, yeah, a bit disappointed on the multimedia, because people used to the media is growing quite massively now. The new movies are like 40 gigabytes or 50 gigabytes in size, so you need lots of space there, and people need more bays to store all this multimedia. And when you have this AMD processor, all you can push is converting 1080p movies. That's the only thing you can convert with this CPU. 4K is the only thing you can do that is using offline transcoding.
Handbrake and stuff like that.
Not everyone wants to keep 2 copies of the movie on the NAS. They want to do it on the live, you know.
But I mean, okay then, so let's unpack a lot of what, you know, because I think you voiced the bulk of a lot of the comments online. I'm not 100% if I'm going to, like, pick and someone put them out on screen. But again, you can head over to those videos and just, you know what, don't even have to watch the video. Just go to the comments and you'll see exactly what we mean there at the bottom. Because I can't agree with you of all the things on there. And I will kind of really drill down into that CPU in a later section of the video. But I think the 5-bay, it's always been one of those systems that's been a bit kind of where it lives in the middle of the portfolio. You got your 2-bay, your 4-bay, and so, you know, Synology is relatively green on the 6-bays. It has to be said. They only introduced 6-bays, I think, in about 2018, and then there was the 8-bays they've had for a while. But the 5-bay has always been a weird tipping point. I mean, when you do look at the products, you're right in the past. I mean, originally they were using Atoms. They went through 2 different variants of the AMD, and they switched over to the not the Ryzen. It was never there. It went to again an Intel Celeron, and it stayed with Celeron for 2 years. And this AMD CPU there's actually a lot more to the architecture. Once you really get into it, you can, if not justify Synology's choice, you can understand if they are classing this system as more of a high volume file transfer system for business and for virtualization and stuff like that, a little bit more than you can see if they'd gone for an Intel there. Definitely a change into the portfolio for the brand. I wouldn't say this CPU is them cheapening out, as you put it. I wouldn't 100% agree with you on that, because this is still, you know, I think it's a 2020 gen CPU, which is largely the same gen as the N5095 that a lot of people were expecting for this product family. And I think the output, the TDP of this CPU is, you know, not terrible. I think it's this idea about what people want the 5-bay to be and what they're receiving are markedly different. I do think this 5-bay seems to make weird compromises, and we haven't even got onto the 1U rack mount. That is a different conversation, which we'll touch on in a moment. But I think this 5-bay, its biggest strengths, the 1522, seem to be in how it can be scalable, which shouldn't. I don't like that. I don't like the idea that, oh, this system's so good. Why is it so good? Because I can add so many more things to it. What, my extra purchases? Shh, don't say that. And, you know, stuff like that. But let's talk a little bit about the rack mount. Let's talk about that RS422 Plus. Because, if anything, when everyone seems to be up in arms, arguably, about the 1522 Plus specifications there, and again, we will drill down into them, the RS422 to me is arguably more controversial. I mean, do you know the specifications off the top of your head on that one?
You tell me.
Well, firstly, it's the same CPU, but it's the memory. The memory doesn't seem to be upgradable. The memory doesn't seem to be upgradable on it. It's only got the 2 LAN ports on there. The information we have on the 422 isn't as exhaustive as the DS15222, but it's still enough for me to be slightly wary about it, because it seems in many ways to actually be a step back from the RS820 Plus, the current, you know, expandable 1U rack mount, and that was already utilizing an Intel Atom-based architecture. Most people would have assumed that was just going to jump ship onto that Ryzen V1500B that we've seen a lot of the more kind of SMB business users jumping onto there. But this one being non-expandable, having a non-expandable memory, it looks like it isn't going to have NVMe SSD slots. This it has that little mini upgrade slot there we'll talk about later on. But that, to me, seems like more of a step back there. I don't even think... One could argue there is a gap in the portfolio between the RS419 and the RS820, but it's not that much of a gap that this device needs to slot there in the middle. I think... Once we talk more about the CPU, for me it'll make a little bit of sense. But before we go any further, let's talk about that adapter. actually. Let's talk a little bit about this mini upgrade slot there, because you said you're actually quite pleased about that. What is it about it that stands? Why are you so pleased about that?
Pleased about the fact that they actually start introducing 10 gigabit into their ranges. But when you see this slot on rack mount, what you just mentioned, it actually is slightly upsetting, because they could easily put in their PCI standard card option upgrade. The fact that they chose to have this sort of connection there, that means that only their cards will be allowed, because there's no other cards in the market that would fit in that slot.
Proprietary direction you're not in love with. Okay.
Yeah, on the rack mount range, definitely not. There is no reason to go for this standard of 10 gigabit upgrade card. It's very limiting. So it's going to be happening the same thing with RAM modules and hard drives. So now they're going to be limiting also the cards you can actually put in your NAS, which is going to upset loads of business users, actually.
Because I know this CPU, because if we talk about the CPU in a bit, this in question, this is the Ryzen embedded R1600. So this is part of their kind of integrated Ryzen series of processors that are for server use. So they've got an extended utilization in terms of durability and support. But this CPU is a dual core. As you mentioned, it does not have embedded graphics on board, which is, again, really surprising given that this series, both the V series and the R series, have their equivalent of the Intel embedded graphics in the form of the Vega integrated graphics there. And there are revisions of that have that. What this does have, that again lends itself ever so slightly to that business class side of things. Firstly, it's got 4 meg of L3 cache, and we know that Synology's DSM platform, it does some of the best background caching there in terms of reappropriation of the available cache on the fly, sometimes using more than it needs to because it's available, and then scaling back dynamically, which is pretty good. On top of that, again, they mentioned the TDP, I think it's between 12 and 25. Don't hold me, it might be 15 to 25. But its power utilization is probably one of its biggest benefits. And of course, then you've got things like the threads. Although it's a dual core, it means it does have 4 threads in this architecture at least, which means, virtual CPUs. And the fact the CPU allows up to 32 gig of memory, and again, ECC memory, something Synology have really had a big thing for. Again, it's that if you're looking at it as an affordable business bracket solution, some of these choices make a little bit more sense. I'm not completely in love with the idea, I've got to say, but again, if you look at the 5-bay as an entry business solution rather than a prosumer media solution, then it starts to make a little bit more sense. I still think they could have done more. They should have made it an integrated graphics processor anyway, something Synology very rarely does on these SMB solutions anyway. But once you compare its architecture to things like the N5105 that most people are thinking about, that this and indeed the likes of the potential 922, 722, etc., could arrive with, those do not support ECC memory. They have limitations in some places of 16 gig, depending on the revision of that M5000 CPU. And their PCIe gen in the background there, they run, there's fewer PCI lanes available to that. I think it's 8, with the Ryzen R16 having 16 there. They don't have the multiple threads, even though they're quad core. They only have 4 threads. It's not 4 over 8, as we've noticed before. So again, there is give and take there, and it all comes down to how the system is being marketed, who it's intended for, that changes things. Now, we will talk at the end of the video, definitely, and this video should be chapterized. If you want to skip ahead, please don't, but it's there. We will talk about what our thoughts on the expandable 4-bay and the 2-bay. But this CPU, if you really look at it in terms of business entry, it makes a bit more sense. I still think the dual core is a bit of a mistake there, and I think it being non-graphic embedded is a bit of a mistake there. But the architecture of this CPU, I think, is getting more hate than it should, because it's not being classed in the right way. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah, exactly. Because you can see that they are actually preferring business customers rather than home users, especially with these new releases. This CPU obviously is better than Celeron if you use it for things like Docker, for virtual machines or web server, things like that. Obviously, it's better than Celeron, but it's not having graphics chip is even for business users, this is something you need, especially if you work on video editing or something like that. You need to share those projects afterwards. And nowadays, video industry is like growing massively, and everyone need to share, and everyone is collaborating, working from home and stuff like that. They are not anymore working in offices, so they need to be able to share these projects across the globe, you know. And they're trying to, in a way, please both sides, but they're actually letting down both sides, just because having this dual core processor in this NAS, it's actually limiting how many apps you can run on this NAS. Because with dual core, once you have enabled Docker on virtual machines, that's it. That's about it. You're already limiting your data transfer speeds if you want to transfer data using this 10 gigabit connection, because who knows what sort of speed you're going to have from this mini 10 gig. It might not be even full 10 gigabit speed. And how many lanes is going to take from CPU, that all is going to affect. So they have narrowed down all this like hardware to like absolute minimum where this NAS will be operating kind of well, and they could just cut down the costs. I think they're not giving this like little bit of extra hardware just as a spare thing for people to play with. So it's just like, this is how much you get, and you got this box, no more, no less.
I was going to say, I'm getting a little bit of interference on the mic there. I think it's maybe the Zoom connection. I'm sorry to anyone that's hearing that and going, what the hell is that noise? But yeah, pretty much everything you said got through, don't worry. But all of this, of course, all of this funnels down to the 2 and the 4 bays, right, Ed? I mean, hypothetical, do you think this architecture is going to be utilized on a 2 and a 4 bay disk station?
I think not this year. To be honest, if I need to speculate, that I don't think so that they will introduce this year, simply because they will need to change the size of the box actually to fit in this extra adapter. It's easy with 5-bay. 4-bay potentially
they did it with the 5. It's the same size. Sorry to interrupt. It's the same size chassis as the previous.
I think they're just going to leave these ones for a test to see how popular it's going to be, and if it's going to be popular, then maybe next year or two years after they will introduce that on 2 bays and 4 bays, but not yet. I think not yet.
Because of course the buzzword flying around is DS922 or DS722 or DS422 222, that kind of thing. Is there going to be a dual core variant of this? I believe the dual core, because originally when we did talk about CPUs and when we were speculating, everyone, including us, thought the new generation 2 and 4 bays would go one of 2 ways. One, they would go with the N5105 processor there. They would go with that one, a quad-core Celeron, 4 gig of memory, upgrade to 16. And it was moderately predictable, and I think most people were like, and of course it will include 2.5 GBE. Of course it will. Of course it will. Now, of course, things don't feel so certain. But now, of course, we could wonder, are Synology just going to skip the 22 plus generation on the 2s and the 4 bays this time? It wouldn't be the first time they've done it. If you kind of turn the clock back, you can see that some of these prosumer plus series boxes have arrived in odd numbered years. The DS1019 plus, the DS415 plus, the DS215 plus. It's not unheard of for Synology to break from the 2, 4, 6, 8 mold of their releases on this. And this lends back to that other CPU we talked about. Would it arrive with the J6412, a 2021 released Intel Celeron processor? Simplifies the range. You don't have the mixed kind of skews on those Intel Celerons from the 5000 series mucking things up. And if they do that, again, that kind of makes sense in this release strategy of bringing the 522 up with this newer Ryzen release. Then they go into a 2.3 series at the end of this year for the 923, 223, 723, etc. And then upgrade the other existing Ryzens towards this processor. Now, again, none of this is confirmed, but it would kind of make sense in that model. Could it get a bit late in the day to hear about a new 4 or 2 bay? Doesn't mean it's not going to come, does it? I mean, by now, normally, we'd sort of, if not know, there'd be little blips and blobs online if there was a new 4 or 2 bay out there. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, exactly. It's just because the deadline is June when they're supposed to release new models, and it's approaching really quickly.
I think maybe because they have released late before the 1520 came out in August of 2020. So that was quite late for them, but it had been at least revealed informally by July. Most of these are, most releases informally get revealed one way or another within a couple of months of their eventual release. But I mean, for you, let's say right now, if there was a DS922 and it arrived with this architecture, it had that R1600 processor, it had this 10GB upgradability, would you buy it?
Not with this CPU, definitely no. If there is no Celeron or AMD-based graphics chip, I would not even consider that box. So I'd rather go for a bolder nose. Even 920 is still powerful enough to deal with pretty much any media you have nowadays. There is no reason really to upgrade apart from faster LAN ports, because all broadband providers, like internet service providers, they already come with 2.5 gig routers. And then having a NAS which is slower than your internet is makes no sense.
I think at the moment with Synology's releases, particularly like the 2.5 GBE debate and the CPU and stuff like that, one of the interesting things we're seeing is this 1522. When I first saw the specs, I was like, this is cool. And that was before I saw the CPU. Everything about it, I saw 10GB upgradability, I saw the usual expand. I've always loved the 5 bays in the series, the 15 plus, 15, 17 plus. All of the 5 bays for me have always been kicker. They've always been the 2s and the 4 bays, but we've upscaled. And this is the first time I've seen them go, well, we're going to be a bit tepid, if you will, just holding it there, holding fire. And I think for me, if the 922 featured this architecture, in the absence of an alternative, I probably would recommend it in terms of its hardware for a 4 bay. It would still be technically the most scalable 4 bay on the market, a 922 with this architecture. But I think I would be recommending it with this big old caveat attached to it that goes, because it's good for business. And Synology's platform, more and more, the more we see it, is moving in that direction with a lot more businesses looking at DSM. So I think I would recommend it, but I would recommend it to that audience, if you know what I mean. Because I don't think Synology is going to turn their back on the Intel Celeron crowd and the multimedia crowd, and more importantly, the 2.5 GBE. I think Synology won't have ignored this. I think they must have done enough market research to know that they can't make a 922 of this architecture, and if they did, it would be the biggest red flag in the world for their audience. And I think they know that. They're not they're not ignoring public opinion to that regard. But we'll have to wait and see, right? Because for all I know, within a week of this video, we might all be proved wrong, but it'll be interesting to see. But I think that's about it, Ed. Have we covered everything you can think of there?
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking that on this 10 gigabit slot they just introduced, it might be used as well for 5 gig and 2.5 gig upgrade cards.
Exactly.
So maybe something like that will be released very soon for those who can't afford 10 gigabit. So we will say about that.
Bear in mind, it is a PCIe Gen 3. If it's built on the inner disk, kind of what we've learned about that architecture. Because again, Synology have used pre-made hardware solutions such as the Aquantia 10GBE controller as well. They're not averse to using this sort of stuff, but if it was in that architecture, another big takeaway would be one, that if it has PCIe Gen 3 times 2, that's 2,000 megabytes per second to play with. And if it's being used for just a single 10G, there is the adaptability. Whether there's the physical space is a different conversation. But alternatively, that's another thing to look at with this CPU, because this CPU being 8-lane Gen 3, the result is that I think it's better suited to this adapter. Whereas when we've seen a lot of the Celerons previously, a lot of those didn't have sufficient kind of PCIe, and of course we've got to factor in chipset bandwidth to allow all of the different hardware features and 2.5 GBE or other stuff. So it might be that a Celeron platform doesn't allow for an adapter like this or this kind of scalability until I have the memory. But again, all of this is hypothetical based on how Synology proceed with these releases. But I do think there's architectural parts of this CPU that I think if it's suited to this Synology business shift that we see and, they seem to demonstrate over and over again, that I think in a 922 just wouldn't work in the conventional sense that we know it of a Celeron. But again, hypothetical. Let us know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Once again, click like if you enjoyed the video. It helped us out. Click subscribe if you want to learn more. And again, if you need help, if you need some free advice, me, Eddie the Web Guy, we have the free advice section. We answer as many as we can. We like to think we answer every single one of them, but again, the volume of those inquiries can get very, very big there. So again, if you've got a query or you need help with your setup, I wouldn't put it in the comments, because we try to go first come, first serve, and that free advice portal just makes sure that we can do that. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers for joining us, Eddie. I will have yourself a lovely week, and otherwise, I will see you guys next time.